Welcome to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast, your weekly news roundup of hunting, fishing, trapping, and conservation stories from around the Gem State. Hosted by Fish and Game's Public Information Specialist, Connor J. Lease.
And welcome back to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast. We got a ton to go over today, including a deep dive on kokanee fisheries, how to shed hunt responsibly, and a reminder to tune in for the March Commission meeting. But first, it's spring break, baby, which means it's time to go wild for fishing.
Yeah, let's go fishing!
Fishing is fun. It's as simple as that. And fishing is an activity that kids and adults can enjoy together. Kids under the age of 14 do not need a fishing license. Adults can buy a day license or an annual license through the gooutdoorsidaho.com app and start fishing immediately. It's also simple and inexpensive. A basic fishing setup is very reasonably priced, and all the tackle you need to get started is a hook and worm with a weight or bobber attached. If you're new to fishing and want to teach your kids, check out Idaho Fish and Game's Learn to Fish webpage. We also have a free rod loading program at many state parks around Idaho. Now, Idaho is rich with places to go fishing. Most Idaho communities have a lake, a reservoir, a pond nearby, or in town, which are probably stocked with some kind of fish. To find out fishing spots near you, check out Fish and Game's Fishing Planner. Another positive is our trout stocking program, which ramps up in March. As weather starts to warm and more waters become available, Fish and Game staff travels around the state stocking catchable-sized rainbow trout. About 60,000 trout will be stocked in March, and to see where they'll be, check out our fish stocking webpage. You also might want to consider turning your fishing trip into a fun day trip. Maybe you live in parts of Idaho that are still buried in snow, which is not uncommon in March. But finding some open water to fish is usually a reasonable distance away for a day trip, which makes fishing a good excuse to get out of town for a day or even a weekend. Getting outdoors is always healthy, and you can mix it in with a hike, boating, camping, and other fun activities. And don't forget, you may get a meal out of the deal. Fish are tasty, so take a few home because a fish fry is a great way to conclude a day of fishing. As a bonus, fish caught in cold water tend to taste better. And no, it's not an old wives' tale. Algae blooms that can happen in warmer water may affect the taste of fish, but colder water has less algae. Now, in addition to that, fishing is a lifetime activity. We understand that kids are busy and have a lot going on in their lives. But fishing is something they can do throughout their whole lives and eventually pass on to their kids. It's also an activity that can be done as a group outing or a solo adventure. There are also 40 different game fish species in Idaho and many different ways to catch them. So you're constantly learning and evolving as an angler. And lastly, remember one thing. Fishing is not all about catching fish. That may sound contradictory, but it's true. Going fishing is stepping into the natural world where a child can discover a lot more than just fish. Water is a magnet for all kinds of wildlife, including shorebirds and waterfowl, water-based mammals such as beavers, otters, minks, and muskrats. You may also encounter amphibians such as frogs or even crustaceans like crawdads. If kids would rather explore than fish, let them. It's all part of the fishing experience. Be sure to read Roger Phillips' story on our website to learn more about what to get out of fishing this spring break. Now, speaking of spring, for those of you that are like me, squirming around like bird dogs for the next outdoor adventure, the unofficial start of shed hunting season is just kicking off. But we all got to remember, being respectful of wintering wildlife is part of the sport. On February 2nd, Punxsutawney Phil, aka the fuzzy little varmint that miraculously forecast the winter-spring transition on Groundhog's Day, indicated there would be 6 more weeks of winter this year. The bigger takeaway from Mr. Phil is an important reminder that winter is not over for wintering deer and elk. So keep that in mind before you head out and go shed hunting. Shed hunting is a popular activity and an exciting remedy for cabin fever. Armed with nothing more than a good set of eyes, looking for a deer or elk's shed antlers in late winter and early spring is a highly accessible hobby. Shed hunting is accessible for all types of folks, hunters and non-hunters, youngsters, etc. You can bring your friends, your family, and enjoy a day outdoors and maybe even come home with a natural prize. But unlike other hunting seasons, there aren't typically set open and close dates or daily bag limits unless the Fish and Game Commission chooses to close a portion of the state due to severe winters. Being respectful of wintering wildlife is part of the sport, and chances are, if it feels too early to start shed hunting, it probably is. Here's Toby Bedreau, Fish and Game's deer and elk coordinator.
Wintering big game animals are very susceptible to any kind of disturbance, whether it is from passing motorists, domestic dogs, or shed hunters in late winter and early spring. There's a growing concern over shed hunters putting additional stress on wintering big game in many areas of the state.
Chalking up a winter season as quote-unquote mild is no excuse to hit the hills early either. Deer and elk still rely on fat reserves to get through winter, mild or not, and with nutrient-dense spring vegetation still weeks away, bumping deer and elk off their winter ranges while looking for sheds can have potentially lethal effects. Shed hunters can alleviate potential negative impacts by following these simple steps while still enjoying the activity, starting with leaving the critters alone. Deer and elk are often found in small and large herds at lower elevations. Many will be loafing or eating, and it's important that they be allowed to rest undisturbed. It's no secret that deer and elk spook easily. When one whiffs a human wandering through their winter range, their instinct takes over to head off for the next safe drainage, which can deplete their energy stores, especially if those disturbances are constantly repeated by the next person or group of people. Shed hunters are often big game hunters themselves, and responsible ones recognize that pressuring deer and elk in winter is not only the respectful thing to do, it also increases the herd's chances of carrying over more animals into spring, summer, and hunting season in the fall. Like all hunters, shed hunters should check with a landowner before venturing on to their property in search of antlers. Access permission doesn't just apply to private land. Some public lands are temporarily closed during winter and early spring to provide deer and elk with disturbance-free wintering grounds. And the same goes for motorized vehicles. Certain public lands, including Fish and Game's wildlife management areas, are often closed to unauthorized motorized vehicle traffic and can only be accessed by foot or on horseback. In addition, even if motorized access is allowed on designated roads and trails, shed hunters should also seriously consider the potential impact to wildlife and damage they may cause to roads and trails when the ground is wet. Keep in mind that just because you can drive somewhere doesn't mean you should. For questions about travel management plans or areas protected, contact your local U.S. Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management or a Fish and Game regional office. The next bit of advice applies to dog owners. Control your dog or just leave it at home. You may have trained Rover to ignore deer and elk, but that's no reason to let your pooch run hog wild through the foothills. If deer and elk can sense a human tiptoeing through the sagebrush a half mile away, they can definitely sense a bounding Labrador retriever with a jangling collar. And they're likely to see all canines as predators. So in their eyes, your friendly, harmless dog is no different than a coyote or a wolf seeking its next meal. If shed hunting with your dog, keep it close, under control, and if you see big game animals, head elsewhere. Finally, hunt a place to hunt. Glassing for sheds and wildlife from a hilltop can be a useful tool in a shed hunter's toolkit. Using a spotting scope or even just binoculars can save a person some time and energy combing the hillsides with their eyes instead of their thighs. Modern optics can be your friend for shed hunting just like they are when normal hunting. You can use them to spot shed antlers from a distance, but you can also use them to spot faraway herds and know to avoid those areas, at least for the time being. When the animals have moved on, you can return and look for sheds again. Also remember that during winter, the bucks, and by association their antlers, typically aren't hanging around the does, which tend to be down at lower elevations. Utilizing optics to find far-off bucks or bulls up at higher elevations can be a good strategy for shed hunters, scouting locations where antlers might drop later in the season. For mule deer, that means around December and January, and for bull elk, March and into April. It's not complicated. Next time you're out hiking around or hunting for antlers, if you see wintering wildlife, just find another route. Glass the hillsides from the trailhead or even look for recent sign like fresh hoof prints or scat on the ground. Chances are, if you're seeing does and cows, you're in the wrong area anyways. Be patient, because those higher elevation sheds will still be there later in the season. So trust your gut, sharpen those eyes, and avoid putting stress on wintering deer and elk. Oh, and one final thing. A reminder that folks who come from out of state to look for antlers in Idaho need to have a hunting license. This new rule went into effect on July 1st, 2024. If you know a non-resident who enjoys shed hunting in Idaho, please remind them of the new license requirement. And please be sure to check Idaho Fish and Game's website and social media channels for information about future antler gathering closures. So best of luck to all you shed hunters out there. That is all I got on that. Let's shift on back over to a Roger Phillips story on kokanee. Idaho Fish and Game's hatcheries provide about 30 million fish annually for anglers, and those include about 7 million kokanee. These silvery, landlocked sockeye salmon are an angler's favorite because they fight hard and taste great. In many of Idaho's most popular kokanee fishing waters, most of the kokanee caught by anglers were born in hatcheries, but the eggs that produce them were taken from fish living in the wild. Each year's kokanee egg supply is largely driven by how many adults survive to spawning age in the wild. But things are about to change in the kokanee world. In fact, they're changing as you read this. Biologists are taking a different approach. Rather than crossing their fingers and hoping Mother Nature delivers enough kokanee and eggs for the next generation, Fish and Game biologists started raising thousands of captive broodstock kokanee in hatcheries to hopefully make egg production more reliable and predictable. Here's Joe Kozowska, Fish and Game's state fisheries manager.
Kokanee fishing is really popular and important to a lot of anglers, so we're doing our best to meet their expectations. We face a lot of uncontrollable natural variables that can make that challenging, and we feel like raising broodstock will improve our response to some of that natural variability, so we're going to give it a try.
Kokanee are not only a prized game fish, they're also a great deal for anglers. Fish and Game stocks young kokanee when they're about 3 inches long, commonly known as fingerlings, for about $0.10 each. Survival varies, but they're still a real bargain. Most anglers, especially kokanee anglers, know the number of fingerlings stocked each year is reliant on how many adults survive into late summer when the red wave swims upstream to spawn. Fish and Game biologists build picket weirs to corral thousands of adults, spawn them, and then take fertilized eggs to hatcheries. Assuming the captive broodstock experiment works out, Fish and Game will have the option of adding eggs that were taken from adult kokanee raised in hatcheries. Speaking of hatcheries, here's Fish and Game Hatchery Complex Manager Brian Grant.
This is not an either-or situation. Natural origin, or wild kokanee, and their eggs will still be used, and eggs taken from the captive broodstock will supplement them if biologists can't get enough eggs from wild fish.
Grant also pointed out that captive broodstock and quote-unquote wild kokanee are essentially the same fish. The current broodstock being raised to adults in the Grace Hatchery in southeast Idaho originated from the North Fork of the Payette River north of McCall. With that said, here's a quick and important overview of kokanee biology. While kokanee appears similar to trout, they're still a bit different. After spending 2 to 3 years feeding, kokanee grow to catchable sizes, and like their salmon cousins, they die after spawning. Kokanee feed exclusively on plankton, which are small aquatic organisms barely visible to the naked eye. They spend most of their lives in schools, suspended midwater within larger lakes and reservoirs, an environment often devoid of other game fish. Because of those traits, kokanee don't directly compete with other fish species, and they can often thrive in waters with poor habitat for other game fish. But few lakes or reservoirs have enough natural spawning kokanee to provide sustainable fishing that meets anglers' expectations. In many Idaho waters, kokanee caught by anglers originated in hatcheries. Hatchery crews have the capacity to raise and release about 8 to 10 million fingerlings annually. But biologists have seen kokanee declines in many Idaho waters, including Deadwood Reservoir, which for years produced thousands of spawners that helped fill hatcheries with eggs. Due to a recent shortage of eggs, fingerling releases have bounced around 6.5 million in recent years. So, we're going to get lots more kokanee then soon, right? Well, in the words of Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend. If it were that easy, it would have been done years ago. The goal for captive broodstock is to ensure there's enough fingerlings to meet demand around the state. And in most waters, adding more wouldn't necessarily mean more kokanee available for anglers. Idaho's lakes and reservoirs can't produce unlimited catchable kokanee, so there are trade-offs. But the key takeaway is this. Fish and Game is trying to hedge its bets to ensure there will be a steady and reliable supply of kokanee fingerlings in most of Idaho's waters where they're currently stocked. How many survive to catchable sizes will still rely on many factors, some of which are beyond Fish and Game's control. The cycle of good years and bad years for kokanee fishing, hopefully more good years, still depends on favorable environmental conditions that drive the local populations. Because kokanee fingerlings take about 2 or 3 years to reach catchable size, one bad year of environmental conditions can affect 3 generations of stocked fish. Put it simply, kokanee typically need consecutive years of good conditions to produce good to excellent fishing. And the reverse is also true. A year or 2 of poor conditions can negatively affect kokanee fishing regardless of how many fingerlings are stocked. When managing kokanee, it's all about trade-offs. In other words, to summarize, biologists estimate how many kokanee a body of water can likely sustain. Consistently producing the same number of catchable kokanee every year is difficult because biologists don't know how many plankton will be available from year to year. Kokanee are often stocked in irrigation and flood control reservoirs, so lots of fish can be lost through dams during high spring flows or during summer irrigation drawdowns. Fish and Game biologists have decades of experience managing local kokanee fisheries, so they have a pretty good recipe, but they don't control all the ingredients. To learn more in depth about kokanee management, hit the link below to check out another story we wrote last year. As mentioned earlier, the captive broodstock project is already underway. Initial broodstock consists of about 10,000 kokanee annually, including roughly 5,000 females that are expected to produce 3 to 3.5 million eggs. For you kokanee fans out there, these will be early spawners that are typically stocked across central and southern Idaho, and then also late spawners will remain mostly in North Idaho. The first fingerlings produced by captive broodstock are expected to be released during spring of 2026. While this is a new project for Idaho, it's currently working in Wyoming.
We have a really good relationship with Wyoming Game and Fish hatchery staff, and we've used their knowledge and experience to develop a blueprint to start our program.
Idaho Fish and Game also currently raises about 1 million ocean-going sockeye annually. That captive broodstock and hatchery program is among the most advanced in the world, and there's a lot of experience to draw from. Each species of trout or salmon raised in hatcheries has its own challenges, Grant said. While hatchery crews are confident the kokanee broodstock program will succeed, he expects there will still be a learning curve.
Currently, we don't have surefire production data to tell us how a kokanee captive broodstock population will do at our hatcheries for 3 years before they will be ready to spawn. We do have a solid blueprint to follow, but it will be helpful to get a few years of spawning, feeding, and stocking underway and learn more from there.
You're going to see us talking about kokanee a lot this year. They're a valuable resource here in Idaho, so be sure to check back to our fishing webpage from time to time as kokanee fishing starts to heat up. All right, let's round out this week's Hook and Bulletin with a story coming out of the Southwest region after regional staff conducted 2 elk surveys earlier this winter. According to recent surveys completed by Fish and Game biologists, elk populations in the Weiser River and Brownlee elk zones are well above objectives for both bulls and cows. These abundant surveys helped inform Fish and Game's season-setting proposals for the 2025 fall elk seasons as biologists seek to move these populations towards management objectives by providing additional hunting opportunities for hunters. Fish and Game's elk management plan establishes population objectives for each elk zone. Those objectives are influenced by a variety of factors, including Fish and Game's responsibility to minimize elk-based agricultural depredations. Those are substantial in both the Weiser River and Brownlee zones. Quote, "We have a very productive elk herd in these zones, which is great," said Regional Wildlife Manager Regan Berkeley. Quote, "But our goal is to manage populations within our management plan objectives, which are intended to balance hunting opportunity with minimizing elk depredations," end quote. For both bulls and cows, estimated elk numbers in both zones were up from the last survey in 2019, substantially so for cows in the Brownlee zone, and both bulls and cows in the Weiser River zone. For the Brownlee zone, the 2025 survey produced an estimate of 1,852 cows, well above the objective range of 550 to 850. The survey produced an estimate of 608 bulls, also well above the objective range of 150 to 200. With those population estimates and objective ranges in mind, biologists proposed increases to controlled hunt bull tags, controlled hunt cow tags, controlled hunt either sex tags, and to add over-the-counter cow hunting opportunity on the Brownlee B tag for the upcoming elk seasons. In the Weiser River zone, the survey produced an estimate of 7,897 cows, compared to an objective range of 3,300 to 5,000. It produced an estimate of 1,835 bulls, compared with an objective range of 670 to 1,000. Factoring in the results of the survey, biologists proposed removing the quota for Weiser River Zone B tag, which would make it an uncapped elk tag, and increasing the number of controlled hunt cow tags in the zone. The Weiser River and Brownlee elk zones present similar challenges for management due to the mosaic of public and private lands within them. In both zones, a portion of the elk population are non-migratory and do not leave private lands associated with agriculture and areas considered to be winter range. These elk are included in the population estimates but are not typically available to public land hunters and are responsible for a large portion of depredation damages. During the hunting seasons, many of the elk in the Weiser River and Brownlee zones also get pushed off public land. All of this makes managing elk in these zones a challenge, as Regan Berkeley says. Quote, "These zones are really hard to manage because of that substantial public/private land interface. There are elk that spend a lot of time on private land and are mostly inaccessible to hunters, which makes this a really complicated system to manage to keep hunters and landowners happy," end quote. Biologists are actively working to get better information about how many and when elk are moving on and off private land, and what that means for both private landowners and public land hunters. In 2024, they started placing tracking collars on elk in the Weiser River zone to better understand those dynamics. Ultimately, information like this will help aid future management efforts. In the meantime, wildlife managers believe that they can help address some of these issues with tweaks to seasons, such as adding private land-only hunts to push elk from private land, or at least help avoid elk being pushed onto private. One particularly encouraging takeaway from this year's elk abundance surveys was where the elk were surveyed. The herds aren't just growing on private lands. More than half of the elk surveyed in the Brownlee elk zone were on Fish and Game's Cecil D. Andrus WMA. And over in the Weiser River zone, biologists saw population increases in all three of its units, including 22 and 32A, where there is a greater proportion of public land. For more about the Southwest region's elk, check out Brian Pearson's story on our website. All right, that's all the major stories we got for this week. Let's hit the rapid fire bulletin. The Idaho Fish and Game Commission will meet March 25th and 26th at Fish and Game's headquarters office at 600 South Walnut Street in Boise. A public hearing will begin on March 25th at 7 p.m. at the same location. Some agenda action items include spring Chinook salmon fisheries season setting, 2025 through 26 big game season setting, and a presentation regarding spearfishing seasons and rules. Hey, mark your calendars. Fish and Game will be hosting the Lake Pend Oreille State of the Lake Open House on March 27th. The annual event will take place at the University of Idaho Sandpoint Organic Agriculture Center. Anglers and other members of the community who are interested in the status of the diverse fish populations to which Lake Pend Oreille is home are encouraged to participate in this year's open house. Check out TJ Ross's story to learn how this year's State of the Lake will look a little different. Idaho Fish and Game is seeking information regarding the illegal shooting of a young bull elk that occurred in southern Idaho between March 2nd and 4th of 2025. The elk was discovered near Clover Creek Road north of Bliss and was determined to have been shot. The minimum fine for hunting elk during the closed season is $300, plus a civil penalty of $750. Idaho's 2025 and 2026 moose, bighorn sheep, and mountain goat seasons and rules booklet is now available online and should be hitting the shelves at regional offices and licensed vendors by the last week in March. The booklet can also be viewed online. To keep fish from getting stranded in irrigation ditches, irrigators who divert water from rivers and streams in the salmon region are asked to contact Idaho Fish and Game's anadromous fish screen program at 208-756-6022 at least 1 week prior to turning their water on. This will allow Fish and Game to get any fish screens in the ditch prepared and operational before irrigation water is needed. Fish screens let water go through, but not fish or debris. Any fish that enter the stream are directed to an underground bypass pipe and are safely returned to the river or the stream. Okay, that's it for this week's stories. It's time for our question of the week. This week's question comes to us from Travis R. Travis asks, how far away do I need to be positioned from a government-maintained road to discharge a firearm legally? I know it is unlawful to shoot from and over government-maintained roads, but what about 20 yards or even 100 yards from the edge of the road? Hey, thanks for writing in, Travis. There is no set distance that someone would have to be from a road to legally shoot. The law says that it is unlawful to shoot from or across a public quote-unquote highway. A public highway is defined by Idaho Code in Idaho Fish and Game Title 36 as the phrase public highway means the traveled portion of and the shoulders on each side of any road maintained by any governmental entity for public travel and includes all bridges, culverts, overpasses, fills, and other structures within the limits of the right-of-way of any such road. Hope this helps. Hey, that's all the news we have for this week. Thanks for putting an ear to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin. If there's something on your mind or if you got a question related to Fish and Game matters, feel free to drop us a line at podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. Again, that's podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. Thanks so much for listening, folks. We'll catch you next week.